Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you. Okay, let me address the elephant in the room. I did not post a video last week and I am very sorry about that. I started this channel at what possibly turned into like one of the craziest seasons of my life. So it just didn't happen last week, but I'm gonna try and post like 2 videos this week so that I at least can give the people what they want. Who are the people? Nobody. No one's asking for these. But yeah, just so I have a little bit more content going out, I'm gonna try and get to making another video like this weekend maybe and posting it. So yeah, we'll see. All that to say, I am so excited for this video today because I have yet to really talk to you guys about like some of my favorite books and my book interests, what I like to read, and things that have really stuck with me over the years. So I'm really excited to walk through this video. Spoiler alert, well, this is not a spoiler alert, just a little behind the scenes moment. I already filmed this video, but I filmed it in such a manic state trying to get it posted before Friday last week that I was like, I can't even post this because nothing made sense. It was such a wreck. And I was like, this is too manic for people to even watch. So I just took a breather and I'm gonna refilm it and feel like I'm coming back to it with like more solidified thoughts. As solidified as my thoughts can be. I'm a little bit of a, you know, chatty in the clouds kind of talker. So as solidified as my thoughts can be, and really bring in some quotes that I think are a good representation of the books that I'm talking about today. So I have 8 books that I'm gonna walk through that are my 5-star reads that have stuck with me over many, many years, and ones that I will always recommend to people because I know they're such great books, but kind of in that category of like, ooh, but I'm scared if somebody says they don't like this book because I love it so much. So I'm gonna walk through some of those. I would say I have 8 books for you today. I would say that is a pretty strong list of all of my favorite books of all time. But I certainly have not read enough books that I feel like I can say these are the best books ever, because obviously I haven't read enough. But of what I've read, of the like, and again, I haven't been a crazy reader for long. So of the probably like 50, 60 books that I've read over the past couple of years, these are the ones that have really stuck with me and fully grasp hold of that 5-star read for me. So I'm gonna walk through them, just a brief overview. I'm not gonna give any plot spoilers. It's not gonna be an intense like review of the book, just a general overview, kind of the vibe of the book, and then a quote that I feel like encompasses the themes or the feeling or just, yeah, the overall feeling of the book that I'll share with you guys. So yeah, I'm so excited. All right, I'm gonna start with, and actually let me make sure, okay, I'm on a bit of a time crunch because I'm filming this in the morning before work. So I've gotta be quick but efficient. Efficiency is good for me. Okay, I am gonna start with a book that I already have talked about in one of my previous videos, The Book Thief. Such a good book. And if you haven't heard about this one, I feel like this one's been around forever. It's a lot of books that you have to read, like required reading in school. I never had to do that, so the first time I read it was as an adult. But The Book Thief by Markus Zusak, I believe is how you say it, is just wonderful. It is a historical fiction book that follows a German family under Nazi occupation in Germany. And our main character's name is Liesel. And one thing that is very unique and creative about this book, if you haven't read it and you don't want to know absolutely anything about it, just skip forward like a minute. But if you have read it or if you are just interested in learning more about it, this book has a very unique narrator, and the narrator is death itself, which is really interesting, especially a book surrounding World War II, having death as a narrator just makes for some very impactful, beautiful language that comes from this book. So I think anyone would really enjoy this book, especially if you're a World War II historical fiction fan. I think you will eat this book up. It is so sad, and you'll probably cry your way through it if you're a crier, but I could not recommend it more. This is the book that made me absolutely fall in love with reading as an adult. So I absolutely recommend it. And I'm gonna read one of the quotes from the book that I feel like is just a good representation of the vibe, feeling, themes of this book. I wanted to tell the book thief many things about beauty and brutality. But what could I tell her about those things that she didn't already know? I wanted to explain that I am constantly overestimating and underestimating the human race, that rarely do I ever simply estimate it. I wanted to ask her how the same thing could be so ugly and so glorious, and its words and stories so damning and so brilliant. So good. I just feel like that wraps up so much of this book so well. So yeah, that's The Book Thief. Book number 1, down. Book number 2, another lifelong favorite and an author who has become one of my favorite tried and true authors who I've also talked about in a previous video. But this is A Man Called Ove. I know him as Ove. I relate to this character as Ove, and I call him Ove in my head, but I acknowledge that this is pronounced Uve in Sweden, or wherever the book has its origins. I believe it's Sweden. This book is one of those books that altered my perspective on life, on people, and stuck with me in a way that has been greatly impactful in my day-to-day life. I truly love this book so much. It follows the story of a cantankerous old man named Uwe, who is a man of principle. He likes things to be done the way they're intended to be done. He does not like people who are not respectful of the rules that they have in place, to a fault. This man is viewed as cranky and out of touch by a lot of people in his community. And Ove has the responsibility of working very closely with the board and has served as the president of his HOA and his housing association. And that just gives him a lot of say and control over the people he lives around. This book is really just a masterclass on relationships and connection with people who may not be your family, but certainly make themselves your family. This story, again, is very heartbreaking, but it is filled with so much hope, so much joy, and just kind of focuses around the idea that even if you're alone, you're never really alone if you have like plugged yourself into community and just like created a found family for yourself. So this book is really beautiful. Frederick Backman is, I feel like, the closest mix of both like a poet and a writer. He has one-liners that will absolutely knock you on your tush with impact. They're so good. He's so good. I could not recommend this book enough. This character, Uwe, I have found so many people in my real life, and I call them an Ove. I'm like, he is such an Ove, but he's such an Uwe. I used to work at a Starbucks, and I had a regular who was this character come to life. And I used to have a really hard time with him because he was just so hard to be around. Not hard to be around, but he was just not friendly. He paid with the exact same amount of cash and change every single day. Like, you could tell he was just a structured, rigid man who did what he's always done. And after reading this book, I had like such a heart for this man, because I was like, oh, this is just his way of coping in a world that is changing constantly around him. I feel like this book gives you such empathy for people, especially maybe people in our older generation that are hard to understand. I just feel like this book is so good at that. Oh, so good. Okay, quotes from this book. I could literally write down this entire book as a quote to read, but I thought this was a really good one that sums it up for you guys. Death is a strange thing. People live their whole lives as if it does not exist, and yet it's often one of the great motivations for living. Some of us in time become so conscious of it that we live harder, more obstinately, and with more fury. Some need its constant presence to be aware of its antithesis. Others become so preoccupied with it that they go into the waiting room long before it has announced its arrival. We fear it, yet most of us fear more than anything that it may take someone other than ourselves. For the greatest fear of death is always that it will pass us by and leave us there alone. Not me getting tears in my eyes right now. Pick up this book, read it. You will not regret it. It's so good. Book number 3, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I read this book in 2022. By far my favorite book this year, or that year, and it has stuck with me. I think this book is so important. I think everybody should read it, and even if you don't love it or there are things about the book that you didn't particularly enjoy, I think it's an important one that everyone should just dig into and get through to at least say that you've read it. Demon Copperhead is a modern retelling of the novel David Copperfield. I have not read that book, and you do not have to read that book to understand this one, but just for some additional context, it is a modern retelling. So Demon Copperhead follows our main character, whose name is Damon, but he has very bright red hair, and so his nickname growing up has always been Demon, and Copperhead, he has red hair. So yeah, that's our character, Demon Copperhead, and this book is quite long, but I would argue that every second is worth it. It's so good, and it's really a lifelong story that we are following Demon through from when he is very young and has to grow up a lot older than, or has to grow up a lot faster than any child should. And we follow him into his later years in life. So this is truly a saga with this character. You get to know him so well, and you get to understand a lot about the systems that has created this person. And what I love so much about this book that anyone I think can appreciate, but especially me being from Kentucky, this is set in Appalachia and is a look at how the opioid crisis has severely impacted families in Appalachia and rural communities, not just because of the drug addiction, but because of the institutions that have been in place to have these people addicted to these narcotics. It's insane, and I feel like this book really addresses that in a way that is filled with storytelling and delicately and in an interesting way that isn't quite like just reading a nonfiction book about it. So this is, not only does it address the opioid crisis, but it also, you know, covers foster care, so many of these institutions that are just made to help people that have literally broken families apart for generations. This book is so good. I am certainly not from Eastern Kentucky. This book actually takes place in Virginia, I believe. So it's not in Kentucky. But Barbara Kingsolver is a Kentucky author. So there's just like a lot of myself and my community that I have seen represented in this book that Barbara Kingsolver does in such a great way. And I am certainly, like I said, not from Eastern Kentucky. I'm like just outside of it in Central Kentucky. But this book, and if you've ever loved anyone with struggles with addiction, I just can't recommend this enough. It's long, but just get into it. You won't regret it. You won't regret it. Okay. Live long enough and all the things you ever loved can turn around to scorch you blind. The wonder is that you could start life with nothing, end life with nothing, and lose so much in between. This book. It's long, but it's also worth it. The payoff is good. So Could not recommend anymore. My next book, I'm gonna talk kind of in tandem with two books because they're by the same author. But my next book is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. And this is another historical fiction World War II book that sets place in Nazi-occupied France. So it's not in Germany, it's in France during World War II. And it follows two main characters who are sisters, and they navigate the Nazi occupation in France kind of in polar opposite directions. So we have the one sister who is the more traditional route, whose husband goes off to war, who has the kids that she's taking care of at home, and one sister who basically wants to fight and do what she can to help in the war efforts. This book is very fast-paced, and I feel like the plot keeps you turning the pages page after page. You're constantly wondering what is happening next. It's very exciting, and it's a little bit of a mystery throughout. There's like this character that we're trying to figure out exactly who they are, and yeah, just a phenomenal, like the abominable snowman. What just came out of my mouth? Wow. Just a phenomenal story that I think, again, anyone who has any type of interest in World War II historical fiction books will just absolutely adore this. But I think it's a good one for anyone to read. I think most people who like a heavier emotional book will get into this and love it. So I'm gonna start with quotes from this one. I think I have, just one quote. Okay. I always thought it was what I wanted, to be loved and admired. Now I think perhaps I'd like to be known. So good. Obviously wraps up so much of the story once you've read it, but also just feels like that is a good quote for life. Like, would you rather be like loved and admired for all the great things you've done, or would you just prefer people know who you are, like all the good, all the bad, to be fully known, fully loved? Oh, so good. So why I'm talking about these kind of in tandem is because they're both by Kristen Hanna, and I don't know which one I would tell you is my favorite. I love them both. So this one is, okay, that's kind of our saying goodbye to to The Nightingale. So thank you. But we're moving on to The Great Alone. And unlike The Nightingale, where that one is very fast paced, something's constantly happening, you're like waiting on the edge of your seat to see what comes next. The Great Alone, I would say, is more of a slow burn. So our story follows a family who already has some pretty interesting family dynamics. The dad who's been in a little bit of trouble, having a hard time holding jobs, that kind of situation. And he just up and decides to move his family to Alaska. He's like, that's it. We're getting out of town. We're going to Alaska. So the book, and I think Kristen Hanna is excellent at this, sometimes to a fault, and I think it makes her books read too slow, but she is a writer that matches her tone, her pace with the setting of the book. So where The Nightingale is taking place in, literally in war, everything moves so fast. Every second is like boom, 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 something else is happening. Where The Great Alone, we're introduced to our family, we move to Alaska, and it is like a barren wasteland. And I feel like the book does a really good job reflecting that same energy. So it is a slow burn, at least in my opinion, but it burns. It burns at the end. Not just the end. Like, we are cultivating this rapid burning fire, and it starts with a little baby ember, and we just watch it grow slowly until it has quite literally caught fire, and it is burning. If you love like complicated family dynamics, this is going to be chef's kiss for you. And I wanted to give my mom like the biggest hug after I read this. As soon as I finished it, I made my mom read it too. She came into my room and was just like crying after she read it. She was like, this book is amazing. But it also is just such a good mother-daughter story as well that you'll just want to give your mom a hug. Like, you will just want to give your mom a hug and thank you for everything she's ever done for you. I think I would maybe recommend this one to people over the Nightingale perhaps, just because it's not so specific to like World War II. It's kind of stands on its own in just like a setting in Alaska. So maybe I would recommend this one, but I think I like both of these books equally. Anyway, okay, The Great Alone. One quote. Oh yeah, I feel like this it's really short, but it wraps up very much the vibe, feeling, theme of this book. Alaska isn't about who you were when you headed this way. It's about who you become. Wow. Oh yeah, I don't even think I said this, but it's certainly like a thrillery plot line as well. So yeah, it's keeping you on the edge of your seat once you are building up to it. So good. Let me know if you've read it. My next book, the author of this book has another book that has been out recently and everybody's talking about it, but I have not seen people talk about this book enough, and I'm confused as to why not. I think this could maybe be my favorite book of all time. Like, I'm not 100% confident when I say that, but this is certainly very, very, very high and holds the place for maybe first place book that I've ever read so far. We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. His other book that's out right now is called All Colors of the Dark. You've probably seen the cover of it. And everybody's talking about it, everybody really likes it, but like no one talks about this book. I feel like I see this book nowhere, and it's so confusing to me because this book is so fabulous. It's so fabulous. Oh, it's so good. I feel like the best way to describe this is like a bit of a found family mystery, which is kind of crazy because I am not a mystery reader. Like, they are not my favorite books at all. But this just has like a plot line throughout that we are trying to like figure out what has happened to this woman that was killed. And so we are walking through it with all of these characters that really cared about her and trying to figure out what happened. So it's definitely a mystery, but that I would not say is like the main point of the book. I would much more say kind of a found family dynamics. This book is about sacrifice, ultimately. If you haven't read this book, if you haven't heard of this book, please, for the love of God, read it. Like, I do think you will be sobbing all the way through. I can't even tell you how many times I cried in this book. And if I can find a photo of me crying, I know I have one, I will post it here just to fully expose myself. I sobbed during this book. This is my kind of book. This is my kind of book that I love. Oh my God. It has, I don't even tell you much about it. So this book follows a brother and sister named Duchess Day Radley, and Robin is her little brother. Their mother is named Star, and she has a good friend whose name is Walker, who goes by Walk. And someone is murdered, and we all kind of walk through this story, trying to figure out who did it and learn things about ourselves along the way the whole time. It is heart-wrenching, it is brutal, but it is just the best picture of what it means to really love the people around you and sacrifice everything that you have to make them happy. Whew. It is so good. If Duchess was not a name that like did not at all resonate with me, I would be naming my child after this character, Duchess Day Radley. Okay, I don't know if I gave you guys any type of good understanding of what to expect in this book, but just read it. Just read it. It's so good. Okay, I have a couple quotes from my initial review of this book that I'm just gonna rapid fire read through so that you guys can get a general feel of it. At times she felt so far from a place she had never been, like home was somewhere out there and calling. She just did not know how to find it. None of us are any one thing. We're just a collection of the best and worst things we've done. He said life means having somebody care enough to protect you. Oh, this one. She cried for everything she had lost and everything he had found. And if the good stand by idle, are they still good? I feel like all of those quotes wrap up the feel, the vibe, and the... How many times have I said feel and vibe to talk about wrapping up a book? Just the general energy of this book. It is so good. Please just read it. Please read it and let me know what you think about it. Love this one. Okay, 2 more left, and I'm gonna kind of tear through these because I am on a time crunch. Yeah, I gotta wrap up. Okay, my next book. This one is kind of off the wall for these genres. This one kind of stands out in its own little thing. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This is my first and only Stephen King novel I've ever read. And I said before, I think in a video, I am not a scary person. I do not like reading horror stories, mysteries. I like when there's like a mystery plot line, but I don't love when it is like a mystery book because I get scared. Like I literally do get scared from reading books like that. So this book is not a scary Stephen King book. This, if you haven't heard about it, this is a sci-fi time travel story that is also very based in history because it is, I don't even know how to describe it. It follows our main character who is a teacher in the modern world who happens upon a portal. We never learn how the portal got there. We never know why it's there, but he found a portal and he goes back, or he goes into this portal not knowing where it leads, and it takes him back to November of, or maybe it's not directly in November, but it takes him back to a time in 1963, just before the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He ends up finding out that like, oh, okay, so this, like once he's there looking at newspapers and stuff, he realizes, oh, JFK hasn't been assassinated yet. Okay, this is interesting time-wise. I don't remember if he goes back exactly in November or if he's there for like a couple months prior and he's like leading up to this. I can't remember the details. I read this back in 2020, so it's been a while. But it is so fun. It is so fun. It is by far probably like the most unique book I've read so far. And since reading this book, I've read a few other science fiction books and I think I really like them. So sci-fi is a fun genre for me, I think. But this was my first step into it, so it just felt like the most creative, most unique book I had ever read. This book is a big one. She's big. She's a big book. I think it has like almost 900 pages. Yeah, at the very end of the book, I'm sitting here at like 850. So it is a haul, but I think this book is just a fun one to have like sitting by your bedside table that you like read forever in chunks. And I think you'll want to read it faster. It's so fast paced and so interesting. I don't know, I think most people will like this. This could be an off the wall pick that a lot of people don't relate to, I don't know, but I really liked it. And I read it and I desperately wanted someone to talk to about it, so I forced my husband to read it. This is one of the few books that I read before him, which is especially interesting because he loves Stephen King books. He loves spooky, scary stuff, but he hadn't read this one, so I begged him to read it. He didn't like it quite as much as I did, but I still think he enjoyed it. Yeah, if you've read this one, let me know. Or if you're curious about it, ask me some more questions. I do think it's definitely like a love story as well. So it's not just like weird history sci-fi vibes. There's great love story in here too that it just makes it like all complicated and confusing and so good. Okay, so I'm gonna read the quotes from this one. I have 2 quotes for this. Okay, so the first one. We did not ask for this room or this music. We were invited in. Therefore, because the dark surrounds us, let us turn our faces to the light. Let us endure hardship to be grateful for plenty. We have been given pain to be astounded by joy. We have been given life to deny death. We did not ask for this room or this music, but because we are here, let us dance. So good. Okay, and then this one I think really wraps up the a big theme of this book. Stupidity is one of the two things we see most clearly in retrospect. The other is missed chances. Love this one. Let me know your thoughts if you've read it or if you're planning to add it to your TBR. I think you should. It's a good one. Okay, and then my last book, which I think will be familiar to a lot of you BookTube viewers out there, is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I loved this book. This was the first book I ever picked up based on like a TikTok recommendation. I read this book, I think in 2022, I think. So still like 2 years or so ago. And I was nervous to pick it up because I was like, okay, people are talking about this and I'm not really sure. This one is worth it. So this book we kind of live in two timelines with this book. One is the modern day conversation that we are having between one of our main characters and the detective who put him in prison for 10 years. They're having this conversation after our main character has been released, and the detective is basically just like, bro, I don't know what went down, but I need to know what happened. I need to know what happened, the real story. And while we are in that conversation, we are flashing back to our main character and the past tense timeline of everything that went down when they were at this arts college and someone was murdered. I was a theater kid growing up, so this book was a bit of me. I loved it. There's a lot of Shakespeare in here. It's very dark academia vibes. So if that is like even remotely interesting, I think you've got to read it. It's certainly a mystery. You're trying to piece together like who was murdered, how it happened, all this stuff. But there's a lot of Shakespeare and there's a lot of like theatrical undertones. So I was like, this might not be a book for everybody. I'm not really sure. I loved it so much and I was like, maybe that's why. But I told my best friend that she needed to read this book because she's a huge mystery person and not at all a theater person. And she loved it too. She really, really loved it. So I do think it can, like, even if theater is not your thing, I think this book will still like really resonate with you, especially if you like mysteries. It's a group of friends, like none of them are really likable characters. It's kind of that like, a lot of people relate this one to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I have a complicated relationship with Donna Tartt, but I have A Secret History on my shelf to read, and it's because of this book, because a lot of people say this book gives Secret History vibes. So I want to read it, but I'm not getting into all that right now. The Goldfinch is like the most confusing book I've ever read, and I don't know if I love it or I hate it. So I'm scared to pick up The Secret History, but I want to read it because people compare this book to it and I loved this one so much. So that was so long and drawn out and I'm sorry for that. But this is not separate, or this is separate from like the book or what you really think about it, and it's not a spoiler. But being a theater kid, they do something in this book that I would have eaten up and would love to do one day so much. They are given a Shakespeare play that they're all going to perform, and the way they go about it, it's like a prepared improv show. It's kind of interesting. So they are all secretly given their characters who they're playing, so they independently learn their lines. They can't tell anyone who they're playing. They don't do rehearsals all together. They just come to the performance knowing their own lines, and it all comes together basically in this like huge improv piece. So they like do their entrance onto the stage, but they have no idea like who the person is that they'll be doing their scene with. They don't get to run their lines together. It is so interesting, and it plays like a really fun role in the plot line. And I just want to do it so bad. Like, I think that would be so fun. Anyway, that's totally separate, but yeah, great book. This is the one I'm ending on. So this is going to be my last quote for you. Okay, so for the first one, what is more important, that Caesar is assassinated or that he is assassinated by his intimate friends? That, Frederick said, is where the tragedy is. Good. And then this one I just feel like wraps up this whole book and its chaos so well. Actors are by nature volatile, alchemic creatures composed of incendiary elements, emotions and ego and envy. Heat them up, stir them together, and sometimes you get gold, sometimes disaster. And I feel like that's what this book is both gold and disaster and chaos and good story. So yeah, highly, highly, highly recommend this one. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you've read it. And definitely pick it up if you haven't. In January, obviously I've not included any of those books because those are more recent, but I read Betty by Tiffany McDaniel and Red Rising by Pierce Brown, 5-star books. And then this is a little sneak peek for my February recap. Oh my God. I read Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby this month. Book is so good. Literally my eyes are like tearing up right now. This book is so good, and this will certainly be on my impactful list of 5-star books. So if you haven't read this one yet, I'll go into it more in my recap, but my goodness, this book, oh my God, it's so good. And I have not read nearly enough books in my life to know that those are my favorites, but those are so far my favorites of what I've read. So yeah, that's just a good recap. Please let me know if you guys have read any of these books, how you feel about them, what stories relate with you, or any of them that you're interested in picking up and adding to your TBR. I look so forward to hearing more from you guys about it and chatting with you guys in the comments. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.